End. Prologue. When the girl was young, her mother passed away. Her only remaining family member was her father, who never stayed home long enough for her to notice. For as long as she could remember, the girl was alone and left to fend for herself. "I want to see father," she decided one day. The girl, who yearned for the company of her only family member, secretly went to meet him. However, what she received was a cold response. "Why did you come here?" I. With a thundering voice, the man scolded the girl on the verge of tears. "Don't come here ever again." The girl didn't expect him to welcome her, for she was used to his cold indifference, but this sharp memory left a deep scar. She grew up knowing she had no place in her father's heart. With a wounded heart, the girl grew older and made her debut in high society. Her grand debutante ball was held in the absence of her father. She eventually left the banquet hall feeling miserable. "He didn't come because he's ashamed of me, right?" she thought, her heart breaking to pieces. As she cried to herself, a man appeared before her and consoled her tenderly. "Why do you shed tears, my lady?" His words were warm and his gaze attentive. For the man, it may have been an act of kindness he gave to anyone, but for the girl, who had been starved of intimacy for so many years, it felt like a savior had descended from above. After that fateful day, she followed him like a shadow, begging for his love and affection till she succeeded in becoming his lover. "I'll give you anything you want. All you have to do is love me," he once said, and she was happy for it. It's as if her dreams finally came true. But reality strayed from her wishes, for he later sang a different tune. "I don't need your love anymore. Truthfully, I've fallen in love with the princess. Let's break up." He said goodbye to the girl whose only dream was to marry him. After their 3-year relationship ended, the breakup left her devastated. "Even you abandoned me. I'll never forgive you." After some time passed, the princess who stole her lover consumed poison at a banquet and fell into a deep coma. This posed a problem because many witnessed the person who gave the poisoned cup to the princess. Did you try to hurt her?" The girl, who blossomed into a beautiful woman, frantically shook her head. Although she loathed the princess for stealing the man she loved, she never wanted to hurt her. She simply handed a cup to the princess because she had asked for a drink to quench her thirst. "No, it wasn't me," she pleaded. But no one believed her. The circumstances surrounding this incident, as well as her usual conduct, marked her as the only culprit. When this truth became certain, the emperor ordered in anger, "Take that weak girl to the underground prison now." But no one moved to receive his orders. Perhaps this was because standing behind the woman was an even more fearful figure than the emperor himself. Father. Although he'd always been indifferent towards her, they were still of blood. The woman sobbed while latching onto his hand. Despite his age, he looked like a young man. "Father, I really didn't." He brushed her off, and her eyes widened in astonishment. Duke Florin stared at the emperor. "I'll personally arrest her." The emperor, wary of the transcendent man in front of him, sighed. "How can I trust you? I know you'll only cause trouble." "You'll have no choice but to trust me if I lock her up in the Room of Shadows," Duke Florin said to appease his anger. The Room of Shadows was a prison cell that confined the most unforgivable sinners. Neither magic nor weapons could break through it, making it notorious for being a prison the worst offenders could never escape from. Only immediate members of the royal family could freely open and close its doors, and in this situation, imprisoning her meant that the Duke was giving up on his daughter. "How could you do this to me, Father?" Filled with despair, the woman was led underground by her cold-hearted father. A fishy smell pervaded the cold, musty air. Entering the cold prison walls for the first time in her life was petrifying. But the most frightening of all was the Room of Shadows shrouded in darkness. The woman decided to try her luck before entering the cell. "Father, I really go in?" Although she called out to him in distress, an icy voice met her. The woman felt an indescribable amount of agony as tears trickled down her cheeks and splattered onto the ground. "I've been abandoned. Truly." Her father reached into his coat to hand her something in passing before pushing her into the cell and calmly said, "Endure." When the door closed, keeping out his stony voice, a bright light formed a circle, and a large geometric pattern appeared. It was a powerful enchantment used to block the entrance. After confirming what her father had given her, the woman was seized by misery and desperation. Why did you give me this? Do you want me to kill myself? Father. As the cold air inside the cell settled on her skin, so did the reality of his abandonment. The woman clutched the dagger her father gave her and cried silently. After some time passed, the crown prince approached the woman fatigued by frustration and misery. As a direct descendant of the royal family, he was able to freely enter the cell. The prince, dressed in black armor, was a renowned bloodthirsty war fanatic. I came to interrogate the sinner who harmed my sister. Get out of my way, he commanded the guards. Though he had a sore relationship with his half-sister, it was unlikely that this man was here to save her. He probably desired to torture her. He's known to enjoy torturing people. The appearance of the prince clad head to toe in black armor, as the rumors described him to be, made the woman afraid. As she trembled in fear, the guard spoke cautiously. Why, Your Highness? We apologize, but His Majesty hasn't approved the interrogations yet. The prince laughed abruptly, the sound so terrifying even the guards trembled. Why, do you think I'll murder her in cold blood? There was a brief silence. It was a wordless affirmation. Eventually, the prince continued. Sure, I'll chop off your heads first before interrogating her. When the guards pressed their lips into a thin line, he laughed manically. The prisoner will only speak nothing but the truth if she suffers extreme pain on the verge of death. The prince turned to the woman. Don't worry. I won't kill you. His calm voice, which uttered cruel words, heightened the woman's fears. Will he torture me until I die? It was rumored the prince not only slaughtered numerous enemy soldiers at the border, but had also killed many enemy retainers. He was a senseless tyrant in the making. The thought of the maniac tyrant interrogating her frightened her so. It might be better to die than be tortured by someone like him. As her rationality became paralyzed by frustration and fear, her last memory with her father came to mind. She wanted his love and comfort, but he handed her a dagger. It's rather good that this happened. Someone like me. The woman replayed the countless insults she had received until now. The only disgrace of Duke Florian, the good-for-nothing that everyone avoided. She picked up the dagger and laughed hollowly. It's better for me to just disappear. The prince noticed something strange and hurriedly reached out, shouting, "Stop!" But it was too late. She plunged the dagger into her chest. The woman took her own life. This was the point where the online novel stopped updating. It would be nice if there was an ending to the story. The real culprit hadn't been uncovered. Jubelian, a shameless man, called out. I sighed in frustration. Jubelian Eloy Florian was the name of the villainess in the novel. The unadaptable villainess who frustrated me to death. Why did you call me here? It was shameless of the man to speak without a hint of remorse. This was the only words he had to say after making someone wait for 3 hours. Truly a shameless man. A voice likewise scolded the man. I see that you're 3 hours late. Jubelian. His face reddened with embarrassment before calling down as he called her name again with a lowered voice. This was a natural reaction. It must have been the first time she spoke against him. Did I say something wrong, Michael? From being a reader of the novel, I somehow became Jubelian, the villainess who perished inside the cold prison walls after being discarded by the male lead. 1. Successful breakup. In my previous life, I was an ordinary college student suffering from a lack of job prospects. I admit reading far too many books in my spare time, but still, I lived rather diligently. I worked a part-time job, gained relevant experience for my dream career, and obtained several certificates for programming, as well as random things that have qualified me to become a tea sommelier or maybe a bakery technician. In spite of this, it was all in vain. Had I known that I'd be hit by a vehicle on my way to my work, I'd have invested a little more time for myself. I often daydream about being reincarnated into a character of the upper class, but never thought of becoming a villainess, especially one destined to live a short life like Jubelian. Usually reincarnated individuals I read about steered clear from their untimely death. However, my behavior thus far had been faithful to the original work. It would have been nice if I realized I was in this novel earlier. I only remembered the details of Jubelian's life later on. On my second anniversary with Michael, 3 days ago, I suddenly remembered that she used to harass him. I also remember other people's unfounded allegations which led to my death have been corroborated by such behavior. The old me used to persistently harass anyone who approached Michael. She threw tantrums and cursed others who tried striking a conversation with him. There had also been numerous instances where threats were made under her family name. I'm now aware that this wasn't normal behavior and that I needed to fix such behavior. Because of these events, Jubelian had many enemies from all sides. I was fortunate enough that I was at the point in the novel where I've yet to collide with other prominent characters such as the princess and the crown prince. I sighed at the face of my grim future, and as if on cue, I heard a deep voice speak with an annoyed tone. "Are you livid because I'm late?" Michael asked. I was puzzled by his question, my head tilted slightly. Have I ever been incensed with him? I don't think so. Michael was the love of Jubelian's life, and the novel's male lead. Now that I'm seeing him up close, my heart was terribly still, and a despondent feeling arose inside of me. To think I was infatuated with him, but I feel nothing now. Jubelian treated Michael like her savior. She yearned for his love and hung on to his every word. At the slightest change of his expression, she became anxious and was constantly afraid that he'd one day throw her away. However, my experiences in the modern world changed Jubelian's personality from top to bottom. I had to take care of tuition costs, keep my grades up, look for jobs, and pay living expenses all by myself. I don't need someone to be my savior. I can save myself. I can change the future myself. After coming to this conclusion, my lips rose to a curl, and said, I'm not angry. I didn't want to waste any more of my time and feelings on a man who wanted nothing to do with me. Jubelian, Michael stared at me with a slightly irritated expression. Although our relationship had been a bit forceful, it had endured 2 years nonetheless. I could understand the weight of his words just by listening to the tone of his voice. Isn't this unhealthy to our relationship if you pursue small matters this way? It was not a request, but a thinly veiled warning. He was telling me to stop pestering him. I smiled innocently like I always did. Except this time, I was sincere. I'm not angry. I was joking when I scolded you for being late, I said cheerily to lighten the mood, but it seemed like he was displeased by my response. He stared at me with a deadpan look. A joke? That doesn't sound like something you do. He huffed and observed me with wary eyes. So why'd you call me here? I sighed up and seeing the blatant displeasure on his face. I guess he can't help but be upset. The past Jubelian often interfered with his training. I decided to let him off the hook this time due to my previous self's past mistakes. Michael, could you please? You said you only needed me briefly. He cut me off before I could finish. I burst out laughing, but he wasn't amused. If it isn't anything important, I'll be taking my leave. Michael was about to leave first at first notice like always. He'd grown wary dealing with me. Despite his ill-befitting manners which brought me nothing but displeasure, I knew nothing good would come from making an enemy with the novel's male lead. It'll only take a minute, I said flatly. I've to go now. Michael sighed. There's an important training session that I can't pass up. I don't want to be late, Jubelian. You understand that, don't you? When I met his cold gaze, I became vexed. This is pathetic truly. I'm not even worth 5 minutes of his time. Hey. 3 days ago, I asked him when he had time for me because I was afraid of interfering with his training. But today, on our promised appointment, I ended up waiting 3 hours in the Imperial Knights waiting room. No matter what I did, this ill-mannered man continued to ignore my efforts. He only valued his own time, not mine. Well, there's no reason for me to endure this any longer. There's no need for me to beg for his love, nor to beg for him to stay. He wasn't worth my time, effort, and affection. I'd only be degrading myself. I set the mood by lowering my voice. Sit down, please. It'll only take a second. I'll have to decline. His voice was threateningly low, as if he thought he was the superior one in this relationship. I had a sudden urge to break his illusion. Father knows that we're meeting today. Wouldn't it be odd if you returned early? Michael's expression stiffened when I mentioned father, a superior he both feared and respected. 5 minutes, he conceded, sitting down in obedience with crossed arms. It seemed that even the strongest knight was afraid of the Empire's sword master. Maybe I should mention father's name from the start. I laughed, thinking back to the time I struggled to please the man in front of me. It was all in vain. There was an easy way out this time. What's so funny? Michael asked sternly. His expression was filled with annoyance, but it didn't matter. I didn't need his goodwill. I started with a sentimental opening. For the past 2 years, we've spent quite a bit of time together. Did you call me here just to say that? He probably thought I was trying to seek attention from him because he interrupted me with a low voice. He didn't let me finish, and he'd already lost patience. He must loathe being with me. It's a tragedy for a man to be so impatient. Would it kill him to wait? I was about to give him a pleasant gift too. Although I was disgruntled by his words, I gave an sincere smile I learned from the modern world. I won't be bothering you anymore. What are you talking about? I frowned at his arrogance. He's being too much. I honestly wanted to tell him, I'm going to tell father about this, and he'll fire you. He knew Jubelian's powerful background. This would teach him a lesson about what power could do. However, father would never fire a subordinate he cared about. If Michael and I came to despise each other, it would only end badly for me. Let's not make enemies anymore. My goal is to live a long life, I thought. I'm saying that I'll let you go, I said slowly, reaffirming this decision in mind. Michael's eyes widened before slowly turning back to normal. Even the corner of his lips tilted. He doesn't believe me. You're bluffing. Do you think I'll believe that? I sighed at his worried composure. It'd be a waste of time to say anything more than this. Sighing, I said, it's up to you whether you believe it or not. I already said what I needed to say. I turned around, but a cold voice stopped me in my tracks. Fine, I'll trust you. Just don't appear in my eyes ever again. Got it? Michael said indifferently. The corners of my mouth quirked up at his unexpected words. I guess the breakup was successful. But whatever his reason was, he accepted it, and I was all the more relieved. My goal now was to enjoy life to the fullest extent. Although father was indifferent towards me, he didn't mind supporting the luxurious life I gained from being his daughter. It wouldn't be bad to live life with pleasure while spending his fortune. My spirits increased as I imagined a bright future ahead. I glanced back at Michael and smiled lightly. I'm sorry for everything that's happened until now. I wish you all the happiness in the world, Michael. After bidding him a sincere farewell, I turned around. When I used to meet Michael, I usually wore pretty-looking but uncomfortable shoes. The ones I wore today were austere and low-heeled. Was it thanks to these comfortable shoes that I was able to leave without regrets? Jubelian was apologetic. Michael scoffed while staring at the woman's retreating figure. Bullcrap, it's all their plot to get his attention. He was certain that women would turn around and come running back to him. But contrary to his expectations, she continued walking towards the horizon without sparing him another glance. When her figure disappeared from view, he clenched his fists. She left. She really left. Was she being serious? Jubelian Eloy Floyn. She was without doubt a beautiful woman despite suffering from an illness of the mind. For the past 2 years, he endured her behavior which she excused in the name of love. Like a dog, the woman followed him wherever he went. She exhibited hostility to the people he spoke to, was over the moon if he gave her even the slightest bit of attention. Yes, she was a dog. A stupid dog who wagged her tail even when pushed away, and showed affection even when her master did not. Although it was maddening, he tolerated her because of the attention he received from her father and his idol, Duke Regis Floyan. Also, he was relieved that those other pesky women didn't bother him when she was with him. Why did she suddenly change her mind? Plagued with uncertainty, Michael clenched his fists unconsciously. Now that the woman was completely out of sight, he unexpectedly felt strange instead of relieved. It's a relief I won't have to see that troublesome woman anymore, he thought, trying to focus on this mindset to shake off conflicting thoughts. But, damn, what's happening to me? He couldn't stop thinking about her. Her words continued to play in his mind. I'm sorry for everything that's happened until now. I wish you all the happiness in the world, Michael. He couldn't forget her smile either. She even looked a little relieved. It feels like the knot in the pit of my stomach has been unraveled. I should take a rest. With a gleeful smile, I went back home right after parting with Michael. It was then I ran into a gorgeous man by the front door. It was father. I inherited his silver hair and blue eyes, but not his striking appearance. He was a transcendent being who aged slowly. It looked like we could be siblings. There'll be a day when I'll look older than him. Father, how was your day? I greeted him with an upbeat voice, the complete opposite of how I felt inside. He stared at me with indifference. Although a family, it'd been years since I greeted him like this. After he turned me away, I only spoke to him when it came to business matters. But now I had a reason to feign friendliness with him. I want to live happily. After retrieving the memories, he stared at me with indifference. Although a family, it'd been years since I greeted him like this. After he turned me away, I only spoke to him when it came to business matters. But now I had a reason to feign friendliness with him. I want to live happily. After retrieving the memories of my previous life, I realized an important fact. No matter how much I begged for his love, Father would eventually forsake me. To him, I was lacking in many ways, nothing more than a shameful existence. He never cared to speak warmly to others when it came to his daughter. Since I won't be loved by him, I'll give up and find my happiness elsewhere. And yes, it'll be the happiness of money. But of course, I've my own sense of right and wrong. I don't intend to be greedy. A small estate in the outskirts of the city, some funds from father, and a job handling one of his countless responsibilities were enough. I'd still be living a luxurious life even with only those things. I had no intention of begging for father's love anymore. But as long as I needed his riches, it was important to maintain an amicable relationship. If I didn't get along with him like in the original novel, I might end up with not a penny in my pocket. I showed father an insincere smile I learned working in retail. You must be tired from supervising training all day. Once again, he didn't answer. My God, would it kill him to utter a word? His behavior brought me into a full mood like it would any other human being. Even so, I was used to it. There was no training today, he said flatly. Huh. Father responded to me. I doubted having heard anything at all when an unfamiliar voice reached my ears. It'd been a long time since I heard him speak. I was taken aback for a second before coming back to my senses because I realized what he just said. I gritted my teeth, cursing the bastard that is Michael. He said he had training. That lying bastard. I swear if I ever see his face. Off. Upon realizing this, I became even more irked. I had the urge to curse profanity at Michael for his cold treatment towards me but quickly controlled my emotions. Calm down, Jubelian, I whispered to myself. He's no longer in your life. Let's be cool about this. The life I experienced in the modern world taught me to keep my calm in a moment of danger. I recalled the time I was forced to deal with an aggravating customer and controlled my expression. You're home early, father said. Now that I think about it, Jubelian usually came home in the dead of night, too busy following Michael around like a lost puppy. But since I broke up with him and came home straight away, I came back earlier than usual. Should I tell father the truth? Similar to the original plot, father held Michael in high regard. He made things convenient for him, while treating him with relative kindness. Since father saw me as nothing but a useless child, he probably toyed with the idea of making Michael his successor. I burst out laughing inwardly. If I was anything like Jubelian, I wouldn't be able to speak the truth, too afraid that father might detest me for making things difficult for him. However, I learned something from Jubelian's past. Trying to be loved by father was futile. I stared at his blue eyes, which were similar to mine, and said, we parted ways. Although I didn't mention Michael's name, he knew who I was referring to. The creases in his face proved this. Why? It was a short question laden with discontent. I understood why he asked me this. If Michael became his son-in-law, he'd not need to worry about the succession issue. But since we separated, I had ruined his plans. Even so, it was a two-person relationship. I needed to take care of myself. I won't allow father to wreck my future. I don't want to spend the rest of my life with someone who doesn't love and respect me, father. Father's face immediately crumpled with horror. He looked astonished that I broke up with a man of talent because of my pride. Father's narrowed eyes seemed to reproach me. My heart tightened, but it didn't budge. I wasn't a child who'd be hurt by his words anymore. I want to marry someone who'll love me unconditionally, father. I want to be happy. That's all. I considered being single the rest of my life, but thought it better to hide my intentions. If I offended him, he might hand me a dagger. I didn't realize this then, but I knew now. Constant indifference was better than cruel abandonment. I'll live quietly without bothering you, so please, Father, leave me alone like you always did. I'd cry at such thoughts in the past, but I feel nothing at this moment. It was as if all the bottled emotions inside had withered. I stared at Father as he turned around without a response. Does that mean that he doesn't want to talk to his pathetic daughter anymore? He ignored me plenty of times, so I wasn't offended. I stared at his retreating back and sighed in relief. I was exhausted. A lot of things happened today. Jubelian's maid, Marilyn, gulped nervously. She bit her lips. The rings that used to keep Lady Floyne occupied were gone. Marilyn was able to breathe in peace the past few days because her lady was in high spirits. But it was a different story now that she broke up with Michael. The news was both sudden and unexpected. Jubelian, otherwise known as Lady Floyne, was a beautiful woman. Marilyn found it rewarding to dress her in picturesque clothes and accessories, but her emotional ups and downs made Marilyn's job strenuous. She'd freely scream and curse if ever she felt slighted. When she destroyed an expensive tea set or ripped her clothes in a frenzy, all the maids became extremely apprehensive. They were terrified that they would one day be treated like that. I'll help you change out of your clothes, Lady Floyne, Marilyn said carefully to avoid provoking Jubelian. Jubelian's bright eyes, which shone like sapphires, looked at her indifferently. Did she say something wrong? Marilyn gulped nervously and looked at her. A supple smile appeared on Jubelian's face. She looked beautiful with that smile. Marilyn's gaze fixated on her smile, almost as if she was possessed. She blankly stared at Jubelian's face when she heard her say, "Why are you standing still, Marilyn? I thought you said you'd help me change out of my clothes." Lady Floyne's smile was gone. Marilyn came to her senses and, realizing what she'd done, turned pale with fear. Perspiration formed around her neck and her insides turned cold. She couldn't find the courage to lift her head till she heard a clear voice speak over her bowed head. "Marilyn, you don't have to help me. Just prepare a bath for me, please." Jubelian's tone made her doubt herself. She didn't seem irritated or angry. Marilyn stared at the beautiful lady with suspicion. When their eyes met, a brilliant smile blossomed on Jubelian's face like a sea of flowers. And please prepare some bath products that will help me sleep. I'm tired and I wish to sleep early." "Why is I'll prepare lavender-scented ones." Despite stuttering, she was able to compose herself and reply in time. "Why is Lady Floyne suddenly acting like this? I'm not used to it," Marilyn thought. If anyone asked Marilyn what she thought of the laddie, she'd say that Lady Floyne was an unflattering person to serve without hesitation. Although she had never physically abused her maids, she'd done plenty of psychological damage to their state of being. "I'll be waiting for the bath then. Thank you." Jubelian finished their brief conversation with grace and walked past Marilyn and entered her room. She gave Marilyn an encouraging remark rather than a spiteful one. Marilyn glanced at the closed door, then staggered when her legs lost their strength. "Marilyn, are you okay?" Seller, an assistant maid, rushed towards her. Marilyn refused her help. "I'm fine. I'm to prepare a bath for Lady Floyne. Please prepare some clothes for her." Marilyn tried calming herself after giving instructions to Seller. Marilyn thought she lashed out at her, but it was not so. The lady behaved oddly today, as if she was a completely different person. The Jubelian she knew threw tantrums when she wasn't in a good mood, ruining everyone else's mood in turn. The moment she thought of this, goosebumps pricked her skin. Marilyn struggled to compose herself. No, she shouldn't think useless thoughts but focus on her work. Nevertheless, Jubelian's smelling face continued to plague her. Is it because she didn't seem energetic? I even felt sorry for her. At this thought, Marilyn let out a sigh and slapped herself in the face. What am I thinking about? Wake up, Marilyn. She reminded herself to stay vigilant. Taking a bath was always an enjoyable experience. Useless thoughts would scatter the moment I soaked myself in warm, fragrant water. However, I was worn out from today's events that even a bath didn't seem appealing. Should I skip it? I'd been thinking about going to sleep for a while now but quickly decided against it. The maids were doing their best to prepare the bath. I shouldn't change my mind at the last minute. It'll only trouble them. I felt wretched after realizing that I'd been so cruel to the maids. I wish I could start over from the beginning, but it was too late. If I showed kindness now, they won't find it sincere and think that I've gone mad. But since I decided to play the part of a virtuous laddie, I continued waiting for the bath patiently. Despite my determination, I couldn't stop yawning. I was drowsy. I'm about to pass out. What should I do? Should I leave? Such thoughts plagued my mind, but I held on. After waiting another 5 minutes, I began thinking about cancelling the bath, but just then, I heard a knock. All right. I rose from the chair to go to the washroom. However, I was exhausted from resisting the urge to yawn. When I finally gave in, tears began flowing down my cheeks. I'm too beat up. I don't think I'll be able to take a bath like this. As I raised my hand to wipe the crestfallen tears, I heard a voice. Lady Florian. Marilyn cried. She looked at me with astonishment, which was an unusual look on her. Did she see me yawn? I probably looked like a hippo with my mouth wide open. How mortifying. I smiled as gracefully as possible, while trying my best to keep my lips shut. Sorry about that. I'm a bit under the weather. Like a professional, Marilyn didn't say anything about my yawning. Are you okay? She asked with a careful tone. I guess I look spent in her eyes since she asked me if I'd be okay to bath. I decided to tell the truth. I thought it better to be honest since she asked sincerely. A few tears leaked from the corner of my eyes as I muttered, I'm tired, so I'll take a bath tomorrow. Could you change me into my sleepwear? Marilyn nodded silently and began helping me into my clothes. For some reason, she bore a sullen expression. Was it because I made her prepare the bath for no reason? I heard somewhere before that it was easier to see things from someone's point of view once walking in their shoes. Maybe because of what I went through in the modern world that I pitied Marilyn, who suffered all this time under Jubelian scrutiny. It's because I'm very tired right now. Marilyn's eyes widened at my excuse. She hurriedly lowered her head. It's not a problem. Please rest, Lady Florian. I'm sure she's upset despite pretending that everything was okay. Thank you, Marilyn. Her legs seemed to wobble for a second, but I was worn out and it must have been an illusion. As soon as Marilyn left the room, I collapsed on the bed. I looked up at the ceiling, wondering if I ended things with Michael today. Yes, I did. What a relief. I was elated that my body shook with laughter. Though I felt sorry for Marilyn, who was upset from the troubles I caused her tonight, I at least parted ways with Michael. Because of that, I slept soundly. Late into the night, long after the moon had risen in the sky, the maids were covertly shooting the breeze in a garden full of white roses. I had a trying day. Same here. By the way, where's Marilyn? Lady Florian's most likely scolding her. At that moment, Marilyn appeared before them. Marilyn. The maids approached her with anxious expressions and bombarded her with questions. How was your day? Are you okay? At Sellers pounding, Marilyn recalled what happened recently and sighed. Jubelian tried to hide her emotions, but Marilyn could see the tears brimming in her indigo eyes. The lady wore an awkward expression and a forced smile. Jubelian frequently bullied the maids, but seeing her gloomy mood made Marilyn feel sympathetic towards her. No, there was some crying. The maids widened their eyes in astonishment. They began to criticize Jubelian. Lady Florian is too much. That's right. She should have taken it out on Sir Michael, not you, Marilyn. Marilyn massaged her temples. It seemed like the maids misunderstood her, seeing, as they tried consoling her. No, not me. Lady Florian was shedding tears. One of the maids who asked if Jubelian had thrown something at Marilyn grew startled by her words. Her rabbit-like eyes widened with surprise. What? She asked aghast. I went into her room after preparing the bath and saw her crying in hush-hush. The maids frowned with suspicion. They knew the kind of person Jubelian was. It was difficult to believe Marilyn's words. Did she really? It seems like the breakup affected her greatly. She looked lethargic tonight as well. Silence pervaded the solemn atmosphere before a man's voice broke the silence. She cried. At his sudden interruption, the maids jolted with surprise. Master. Duke Florian, the owner of the estate, stared at them with a stony expression. The maids trembled with fear. They were caught red-handed gossiping, and had no excuses for the punishment awaiting them. You. The Duke's peacock blue eyes fell on Marilyn. She held her breath. Tell me in detail what you saw, he commanded in a cold voice, and don't miss a beat. When I woke up, my body felt lighter than it had yesterday. It wasn't a bad idea to spend my days as a homebody for a while. I planned to eat a lot of mouth-watering food and live in seclusion. However, this plan was only as good as a wish. For odd reasons I can't fathom, Father asked me to have breakfast with him at the crack of dawn. How's the food? The food is good, of course. It's your presence that makes me sick, Father. It's good. I lied. I couldn't express the truth. All I could do was eagerly eat after giving a short response. Wanting to finish quickly, I practically inhaled the food despite finding it burdensome for a light breakfast. Father was gawking. He looked at me like how one would look at something pathetic. Eat slowly. You'll get sick. But you're the one who's making me queasy. I was already shocked that he suddenly called me for breakfast. The air was tense, worsening by the minute as he stared at me. Why is he doing this? To scold me for ending things with Michael. Whatever the case, I wanted to leave the dining room as soon as possible, but doing so would only reveal my discomfort. I continued forcing food down my throat. Before long, Father looked away from me and sighed. He probably thinks I'm pathetic. It makes sense in his eyes. Father bore the great title of Duke. He also led an elite group of Imperial Knights, and the entire Central Army. After leading the war that took place 20 years ago to an illustrious victory, he became the Empire's most revered hero, strongest swordsman. He had everything. Besides, Father was a handsome man who receives marriage proposals to this day. I can't help it if he thinks I'm pathetic. Father was a character who had it all. It wasn't a mediocre comparison, but a pathetic one. Not only was I incompetent, but my social reputation plummeted drastically as I chased my cow around like a dog. I didn't even have friends because of my poor social skills. In other novels, villainesses were widely liked and admired among their social circles no matter how they behaved. This character is somewhat realistic. I was unconsciously sulking when I made eye contact with Father again. Do you want this? He must have thought I was looking at the plate of food in front of him. I shook my head, but a large chunk of meat already landed on my plate. Eat? Despite being full, I couldn't refuse what Father had given me. Why are you doing this to me, Father? As I silently suffered from overeating, he suddenly called out my name. Jubelian. Yes? What is your ideal type? I dropped my fork at the unexpected question. Why on earth is he asking me this? A servant in the dining room replaced my fork with a new one, but I was knocked for 6 so I felt like I was going to drop it again. I'm just curious. Although it was a simple question, it didn't make sense coming from him considering his treatment towards me the past 18 years. He was never interested in me, so why is he asking this now? An uneasy thought suddenly occurred to me. Was he trying to marry me off to someone else? It was a credible hypothesis. As his only child, I don't qualify as a successor to whom he could pass down his title. No, I'd rather have an evil stepmother or a tyrant half-brother than to marry. I'm not sure. Maybe a man stronger than you, Father. After quickly deciphering the meaning of his question, I mentioned something hopelessly impossible. He mumbled something to himself, then stared at me coldly asking, "Are you serious?" Upon hearing his voice and meeting his icy eyes, I realized that I made a blunder. There was no man stronger than Father in the Empire. Not wanting to provoke him any further, I hurriedly changed my answer. I mean, that would be nice, but there's no such person in this world, right? Father's the strongest swordsman in the Empire. His expression softened at my praise. It truly is difficult to please him. So what's your final answer? I hoped to move on to a different topic, but he had no intention of doing so. I should mention someone with near impossible conditions without driving him mad. After all, no other family possessed higher prestige than the Floyne household. Even if Father introduced a man for me to marry, I could say they didn't fit our family standards and easily dismiss him. Sounds simple enough, right? Having cleared my thoughts, I looked at Father with an austere gaze and said, I won't marry a man unless he has everything I desire. I want the most affluent, famed, and competent man there is. And a good look is a requirement too. I snuck in the possibility that I wasn't going to marry and observed his expression for any changes. His face stayed the same, making it difficult for me to guess his thoughts. After a long silence, he nodded lightly and said, "I see." It seemed like I convinced him. I sighed in relief. Conversations with father left me tired. Just a little while longer, and this will all end. I'll head straight to my room thereafter. I was uncomfortable spending time with father, so I desperately waited for breakfast to end. Jubelian. Yes. I was a little nervous about what he'd say next, but this time, I was ready to answer. He couldn't possibly surprise me any more than this. No matter the questions he threw at me, I would answer confidently. His lips slowly parted. Let's go somewhere together. Startled by his out-of-the-blue question, I dropped my fork for the second time. Pardon me, go somewhere. I searched through 18 years of Jubelian's memories to see if I ever accompanied father, but nothing came to mind. Why? When I responded to his unexpected offer, he said calmly, just because. Bewildered by his brief answer, a dull ache pained in my head. What is father doing? We ended up going to Arcade Street. There was a high-end shopping mall here, similar to modern shopping malls where several stores gathered under one roof. Father pointed to a strange-looking old watch. That one, he said. The clerk guiding us called out to someone, "Neil, add the old watch." I sighed with frustration. My head throbbed so I briefly closed my eyes. I don't understand. Why is he doing this? When I opened my eyes, I tried to not let my gaze linger on any one object for too long. But as I walked past a myriad of stores, a porcelain rabbit caught my eyes. In my previous life, ceramics were a commonly used commodity, but in this world, it was a high-quality item only few could afford. That's why ceramic figures in the form of animals, flowers, and people were envied by the general public. It's a shame. It didn't look charming. My opinions didn't matter, though. Onlookers raved about its beauty. But the various pigments that colored the porcelain rabbit looked chaotic and bizarre. I didn't understand why people were willing to pay a hefty amount for this. I suddenly sensed a burdensome gaze behind me and quickly directed my attention elsewhere. Although I'd been determined to not look at any one object for too long, I caught myself staring at this bizarre object for a while. As I dwelled on my mistake, I heard father speak. That one as well. He pointed at the porcelain rabbit. I frowned with frustration. I wonder why he kept buying things I looked at. I thought this would only be a simple outing, but father was splurging, buying everything I laid my eyes on. It was uncomfortable. I get that shopping was an inevitable part of my new life, but I didn't want to lavishly spend money without careful consideration. Was he testing me to see how I'd behave when I ran out of patience? If he was, what a pain. All I wanted to do was go home, but the reality was that I was the Duke's daughter. My dependence on father meant that I couldn't rebel against his will, otherwise, it would only bring me trouble. This was all my fault for not creating means to be independent from him. I sighed. Something suddenly appeared in front of my face. It was the bizarre porcelain rabbit I saw. If I break this and pretend it was a mistake, will I be scolded? No, it's best not to test my luck. I accepted the rabbit without a choice. Father looked at me. Let's go. For some reason, his expression was more relaxed than before. If someone he knew sees him, they might have asked if he had good news. I sighed and glanced at the things he bought. Perhaps he was the type to relieve stress by splurging needlessly. I followed him in silence, careful not to put him in a horrid mood. Then something caught my eye again. This time, it was a person. She was carrying a sword. It fascinated me. The Empire had clear-cut gender roles, so it was difficult to find swordswomen. As such, she couldn't help but stand out. I remember, though vaguely, a steady stream of swordswomen stopped propping up after Sir Yuli, the first impressed captain of guards, suddenly went missing. No one's seen Sir Yulia since then. People around us began whispering, but I thought it pleasantly nice to see more women wielding swords again. Father also caught sight of the swordswoman and stopped in his tracks. Wait here for a minute. He approached the woman wielding a sword. Does he know her? When they disappeared into the flock of herd, the crowd's conversation shifted. Was that person Duke Floyan? They were whispering, but I could still hear them. I felt uncomfortable with all the unwelcome gazes on me. It felt like I was being scrutinized. I cautiously stepped away from the crowd, but my movements were noticed by Jordan, my escort knight. He was also my older cousin. "Where do you think you're going, Jubelian?" I frowned at Jordan as he looked at me with suspicion. He must thought I was planning mischief. "There are many people here. You should speak with respect, Sir Geraldine." He sulked at my remark, but quickly composed himself in embarrassment. "So where are you going, Lady Jubelian?" he asked more respectfully this time. "I want to buy something from that shop." Jordan's expression hardened when I carelessly pointed to a lonesome shop at the corner of the street. "Is that really where you want to go?" he said in a strange tone. So I turned around to look at the shop, and flinched. The sign read "Growling Beer Armor Specialty Shop." Why did I point to a place like that? Just as I regretted my actions, Jordan said sarcastically, "I will respect the lady's wishes." Unable to change my decision, I simply nodded and answered, "Thank you." I entered the store with Jordan, and was greeted by an owner who possessed the physique of a bear. "Welcome to an jewel in our store." I was embarrassed at his exaggerated praise. What do you need?" I took a quick glance at Jordan for help, but he was distracted by something else. "Oh, I love this gauntlet," he gushed. "He's here to protect me, but he's shopping for his stuff. A bit of a shame. Father would have Jordan's head if ever he found out." "Price," said the voice of a stranger. The stranger only spit out a single word, yet his cold and desolate voice made me tremble. I peeked to the side inconspicuously and saw a man wearing a black cloak that covered his entire body. His face likewise was covered with a black hood. He looked suspicious. "10 silver coins, sir." In response to the owner's lively voice, the man searched through his pocket. He was tall and handsome from the prominence of his nose. At that moment, crimson eyes that I could barely make out under his hood turned to me. I hurriedly avoided his gaze, but not before our eyes briefly met. "This is embarrassing. I should apologize." "What are you looking at?" he questioned distastefully. What ill manners. It was true that I took a glance at him first and displayed impolite behavior, but I didn't want to apologize due to his rudeness. I was looking for the thing you're buying right now." When I answered, the owner stiffened. "Miss, you want to buy this? Is that armor polish?" I tried maintaining a profound gaze when I realized what I was looking at. Knights were usually associated with armor, but in reality, they didn't have to wear them unless they were in combat. In other words, armor polish was useless to me. "Yes, I need it," I declared loudly. I didn't want to admit that I'd been secretly stealing glances at the cloaked man. I'm sure to cry in embarrassment later on in closed doors. It's a shame that the decorative armors in my house have lost their luster. The owner nodded to my answer vigorously. "Of course, but one would not be enough to shine everything in a house." "Hold on, miss. I have more." "What?" "No, I just need one." I tried refusing him, but it seemed like the owner didn't hear me. "Wait here. I'll go through the warehouse to find more." After the owner disappeared, it sunk in that I purchased something out of impulse. I bought useless armor polish. I can't criticize father when I'm doing the same thing. Like father, like daughter. I sighed, thinking of the grave I dug myself into. Meanwhile, the man next to me placed a gold coin on the table, picked up his polish and turned around. I would have ignored him had he placed down a small amount of money. However, a gold coin was an enormous value. It could feed a commoner's family for 2 weeks. "Hey, what about change?" I shouted after him at full volume, but he didn't respond. "Change." I made chase and shouted louder. He should be able to hear me. I began wondering if he was deaf. Maybe he heard the wrong amount from the owner. I suddenly felt pity for him. The man stopped in his tracks. He turned around and glared at me. "So he's not deaf." Despite my embarrassment for causing a commotion, I said, "I think you heard wrong. The amount you paid is 10 times the price." As I explained to the man, I heard Jordan's call. "My lady, what's going on?" This guy." I tried to make clear the situation, but the man took that window opportunity to leave the shop. I frowned in embarrassment when I heard the owner's voice again. "Miss, it turns out that we have 10 more of these." "No, I don't need 10. I voiced my thoughts that I didn't need that much, but the owner wouldn't listen. 1 gold coin for all of these. Oh, you've already done the math. 1 gold coin. It was the same amount the man in the hoove paid. I tried clearing the misunderstanding with the owner, but he continued making his assumptions. By the way, did that guy take my stuff without paying? No, you're mistaken. That damn bastard. The owner cursed at the man. Despite my attempts to interject, I wasn't able to get a word in until he was finished. Finally, I cried in anger. That 1 gold coin was paid for by him. The owner grew flustered. A rosy blush adorned his cheeks. Is that so? You should told me earlier. Is this guy pointing the finger at me? I tried to tell him all this time. What a guy. In my exasperation, I decided to never step foot into the shop ever again. He just lost himself a potential customer. Next to a carriage parked in a vacant lot, a short-haired woman was waiting for someone anxiously. Where is he? She wondered. When the man arrived, she sighed in relief. My lord, I've informed Duke Floyn of your appointment, she said. Good. Although his voice was cold as usual, he sounded somewhat annoyed. The woman realized this and asked, did something happen? Hey, can you hear me? The man thought back to the woman he met in the shop earlier. She had no fear even around a vicious hound who bared its teeth to caution those near him to stay far away. He was ticked off for a second, but the moment he turned around and met the woman's eyes, all hostility disappeared. Reminiscing what occurred, the young man frowned. Nothing happened. I left the shop in frustration. As I walked away, I tried brainstorming ways I could recover from today's unexpected event. Where have you been, Jubelian? Father bore a displeased expression. Oh, I bought something, I quickly answered. Father turned to Geraldine, who was carrying the purchased goods. And what is that? It's armor polish. At Geraldine's answer, Father looked at me with a slight frown. He sighed and said, let's go. I'm aware that I purchased something so useless, but there's no way he'd dare berate me. If he has a conscience, that is. I followed after Father for who knows how long. When an obstacle stairs appeared before my eyes, my composure threatened to crumble. I'd been following him for several hours today. My feet were beginning to throb. I only need to endure this a little while longer. I tried ignoring the pain by imagining the bright future ahead of me after inheriting Father's wealth. Wait, what's going on? I felt a tingling sensation at the back of my head, and my eyesight became speckled with black dots. My legs lost their strength as I tried to take another step. Help. Fortunately, I didn't fall because I grabbed onto something in front of me. As soon as my eyesight came back, I looked up to see what I was holding onto and stiffened with fear. What are you doing? Although I was worn out, I couldn't believe that I had latched onto Father's arm. Oh, I'm sorry. To not ruin Father's mood, I hurriedly apologized and backed away from him. He held onto my wrist. Stay still. My field of vision swayed violently. The next thing I knew, Father carried me bridal style. I choked in embarrassment. Father. He didn't answer and continued walking while holding me in his arms. I was not one to stutter. It's the embarrassment Father displayed, I tell you. We're going back to the carriage, he said flatly. I looked up at him, surprised by his words. Icy blue eyes and a twisted expression met me. He looked displeased that I had gotten in his way. I'm fine, Father. I tried convincing him to put me down, but he ignored all pleas. Quiet, he ordered with a cold voice. As he continued to hold me in an embarrassing position, I swallowed my shame. Why is he like this? I'm confused. He was acting strange when we were shopping too. Maybe it was due to the stress, but my head throbbed and itched. I was in so much agony that when Father sat me down on the carriage seat and took off my shoes, I couldn't say anything, much less retort. A stinging sensation ached around the back of my feet. I must chafe my heels. I'll apply some medicine and rest when I get home. I have no choice but to endure. Why didn't you tell me? Father asked sternly. It seemed like Father was in a bad mood. I ruined his day. I tried hiding my increasing stress levels. It's really not a big deal, I chuckled softly. If I pretended to be okay, I hoped he wouldn't treat me like a useless person. Let's go back shopping. That should do it, right? But contrary to my expectations, his voice was as cold as ice. We're going home? What? But Don't say anything useless and stay still. I clamped my mouth shut before releasing a small sigh. Although I listened to him all day and behaved well, his countenance didn't seem so good. It truly is difficult to please him. The heat from my forehead rose and my headache worsened by the minute. What's happening? I feel sick. As soon as I became conscious of the bizarreness of it, Father's voice vibrated in my ear. Jubelian. I turned to him. He sighed and opened his mouth again. Sooner or later. A good one. Shopping. Your thoughts? How strange. Father's voice kept cutting off, and I couldn't concentrate on his words properly because of the pounding headache. I'll just agree to whatever he says. I nodded along even though I couldn't hear him well. I didn't want to spoil his mood. My head began to feel heavy, so much so that I couldn't sit upright anymore. Is something wrong? Father asked gently. Fortunately, I could hear him clearly this time. The moment I tried to answer, his eyes widened as if he was shocked about something. Jubelian. He called my name. That was the last thing I heard before my consciousness blackened. A carriage bearing a lyre and sword crest that symbolized the Floyne house was spotted on the horizon. A butler came outside to greet the approaching carriage and smiled to himself merrily. I wonder if his date with Lady Floyne went well today. He'd been excited about it, he thought. He recalled his master's determined look as he questioned the servants about what his daughter liked and disliked. The butler tried suppressing his amusement, but Laughter couldn't help but spill from his lips. The carriage soon arrived at the mansion, and the door opened. He bowed to greet his lord. Welcome, master. When he looked up, his smile immediately disappeared, and his eyes widened with shock. Lady Floyne. Jubelian turned deathly pale in the arms of his master. She looked like a wax doll. Waters. The butler stuttered, trying to find the right words to say, but was cut short by a fierce voice that snapped him to attention. Derek. Panic reflected in his master's eyes, but his expression was as steely as a slab of ice. Summon Ellen. Right now. The past Jubelian had fallen sick a few times, but it wasn't severe enough to the point that her father visited. Her heart broke whenever she regained her strength. Wake up. Out of annoyance, I opened my eyes, though barely, to see who was murmuring in my ears. I could barely make out a man with a blurry and distorted face. It didn't help that my body was floating in the clouds, giving me no sense of reality. Jubel, it was strange. He didn't have a reason to call me like that or look at me with a face that looked to be on the verge of tears. No, this can't be. If you're gone, It said that dreams were unconscious expressions of what the dreamer desperately desired deep in their hearts. Please wake up. What a terrible dream. As the fleeting thought passed, I sank into the darkness. I was on my bed when I awoke. How are you feeling, Lady Floyne? The first person I saw was Ellen, the Floyne house's family doctor. Only then did I realize that I hadn't fallen fast asleep, but passed out. How long has it been, Alan? 3 days, my lady. I observed my surroundings. Maids looked back at me with anxious expressions. How are you feeling, Lady Floyne? Alan repeated. Marilyn, Julie, and Sella. I counted the maids in my room. Father was nowhere in sight. It's not like I expected him to be here in the first place. He hadn't shown up to my debutante ball either. At that moment, the door opened. Orlan's countenance brightened and ushered a figure inside. I turned around to check if it was Derek, our butler. But it wasn't him, it was Father. He came through the door. I widened my eyes with surprise. Why was he here? I stared at him, unable to believe that he was here. He gently placed his hand on my head. Was this a dream? I could barely believe what was happening. As I continued to stare at him unintentionally, his hand retracted. Rest. I stared blankly at the retreating figure, then laughed to myself. Don't be fooled. He'd been cold-hearted towards me for as long as I could remember. He even detained me in the original novel. Father only came to check my well-being because he didn't want to look like a heartless father who neglected his sick daughter. I shouldn't fool myself to think there was more to this, so I quickly destroyed any lingering attachments I had to avoid developing expectations. You've overexerted yourself recently. Please rest well, my lady. As Alan advised, I decided to rest by reading a book on my bed. But it bored me to death. A light novel would have been more entertaining, but this book was about human resources and estate management. It's what I get for choosing to neglect my studies up till now. Some people might speculate why the Duke's only daughter bothered even studying, but reality wasn't that simple. Father would never pass down his title to an incompetent person like me, so it was likely that he would remarry to produce a successor. In that case, I too would have to marry a man born with a silver spoon or become independent with only a small share of my inheritance to support myself. But I had no intention of doing the former because marriage was a risky investment. In a conservative and patriarchal setting like this, the activities of married women were limited to fulfilling their responsibilities for their families and playing the part of a filial daughter. They were expected to diligently oversee their family's reputation while maintaining dignity as a hostess. Additionally, they might have to bear restrictions on living lavishly if the husband was their only source of income. All this went against my objective goal of spending money on what I want, whenever I want. There was only one solution. If I received an inheritance from father and became independent from him financially, I might be able to make income. And if I got lucky, I might acquire a big share of the inheritance, and even titles father was responsible for. But the biggest stumbling block came after that. In my new life, I learned only manners and basic literacy skills that were expected of a noble lady. With these major skills alone, it'd be difficult to survive in this world alone without help from a man. I could try to build a source of income, but I knew better than that. Starting a business was not for everyone. While I possessed knowledge of modern civilization, there weren't many things I knew how to make. I didn't have excellent vernacular or entrepreneurial skills, nor did I have many connections. There was a high probability that I'd fail and end up with a fat lump of debt on my back. The only solution I could think of right now was to maximize the wealth I inherited from father. The only problem was that I don't know how. I sighed when I came to this unpleasant conclusion. Then I heard a knock on the door. "Letters that have arrived for you, Lady Florian." I sat up. They came as expected. My social reputation was in shambles, but it was nothing compared to people's reverence of father, a living hero. "Please bring them here." Marilyn carried in a silver tray, stacked with a pile of letters. "Here they are." I skimmed through the letters one by one, unable to resist the urge to giggle each time. There were dozens of letters, but not a single one was sincere. It was as if they're telling me that I lived a life in vain. This left a bitter taste in my mouth, but I wasn't upset. I'm the only person to blame. In the past, I never cared about what other people thought of me. I was too preoccupied trying to win Michael's affection. While I frequently lashed out at those who offended me, I showed him favor no matter how he treated me. As a consequence, I became a lone wolf. There was no one else to blame for this but myself. "Do you want me to put these letters away, Lady Florian?" I looked up at Marilyn. Since I was done skimming through the letters, she probably thought I wanted to put them away. "No, I'll reply to all of them myself." She widened her eyes. "Are you sure you want to reply to these letters?" I chuckled at her question. "Yes, I'm sure. They sent them to me out of concern, so it's my duty to personally reply to them." I knew very well these people didn't send me letters because they were worried. It was because of father and his prestige. However, there were several reasons why I couldn't ignore them like usual. Many nobles resented me for disregarding them as if they were mere trash. I'll have to show them that I'm not that kind of person. No matter how poorly I was perceived before, I'm sure they'll change their opinion of me if I showed them my supple but clear transformation to becoming a better person. Writing replies to these letters was a part of the plan, but I ran into an obstacle before I could begin. What should I write? Since I was indifferent to the lives of others, I didn't know their preferences, much less how to strike a correspondence. I don't know the nobility well enough to compliment them. I pondered hard on the matter when an idea sprang in my head as I looked at Marilyn. Now that I think about it, Marilyn must have written replies to these letters all this time. When one thinks of a maid, they usually think of a person who does the laundry or cleans the house. But unlike ordinary maids, maids-in-waiting were expected to possess excellent speaking skills and knowledge of social affairs. Because they were tasked with assisting aristocrats, they usually hailed from fallen noble families or middle-class families that could afford an education. In other words, Marilyn was like my secretary. "I have a request, Marilyn. Please do tell. Can you help me reply to these letters?" Marian widened her eyes and gaped at me with a bewildered expression. This was natural, given I had never asked for her help in the past. It's a given, but I'm no longer the stupid and prideful girl she once knew. I looked at Marilyn and said, I just need to know a little bit about the families we usually interact with. Yes, I'll do my best, Lady Florian. I smiled at her compliance and replied, thank you. It's reassuring to have your help. Marilyn briefly looked at me strangely before quickly fixing her composure. Then, I will bring a pen and some paper. Marilyn stood outside the door of the Duke's office with a stiff expression. Madame Piers, the head of housekeeping, glanced at her and announced, this is the girl who serves Lady Jubelian, master. There was no answer as the door opened. Marilyn gulped nervously and stepped inside the room. However, the sight before her turned her fear into admiration. The Duke stood in front of a large window, his silver hair dyed with scarlet from the ember sunset. He looked like a picturesque painting. What did Jubelian do today? His voice promptly brought Marilyn back to reality. She wrote replies to letters after reading a book. Marilyn's stuttered answer subtly changed the man's stony expression. She read a book. His surprised expression left as quickly as it came. Marilyn glanced at the Duke's blue eyes, which reminded her of the vast sea, and did her best to keep herself together. What kind of book? Its main topic was about estate management. The Duke frowned slightly. Why? It was natural for him to ask. Jubelian never read books before, much less anything about estate management. Marilyn recalled what Jubelian said when she asked for the book. I'll be a nuisance to father if I don't know the basics. Lady Florian said she doesn't want to be a nuisance to you. I still don't understand why she'd want to read something like that. He had an annoyed tone, but Marilyn could feel that it was markedly different from before. Perhaps she wants to talk to you. Marilyn voiced her thoughts without thinking. The Duke stiffened at her words. Marilyn gulped nervously. She doesn't have to know something like that to talk to me, the Duke said lowly. Contrary to his indifferent tone, he was smiling. It was a dazzling sight that Marilyn couldn't help but blankly stare at his face again. Take good care of my daughter, he commanded with a soft voice. His indifferent expression took over his face again, as if he didn't smile in the first place. 4 days passed since secluding myself in my room. During that time, I finished reading all the books I borrowed from the library. I needed a new book, but Marilyn had gone out for some errands. Stella was in my room as her replacement. I looked at her. Is there something you need, Lady Florian? Unfortunately, I couldn't ask Stella to bring me books. Unlike Marilyn, who received proper education, Stella could only read basic words. I thought it better if I went to the library myself. I didn't want Stella feeling awful if she knew the reason why I didn't send her to the library, so I decided to send her elsewhere. Could you bring me some chocolate cookies and tea, Stella? Yes, of course. Stella beamed. I'll be right back. When she left, I informed another maid that I'd be getting books from the library and ventured outside my room. It was quite a hassle finding the right book to read every time. I opened the door to the library while lost in thought and gasped when I saw Father inside. Oh, Father. Gee, good morning, I stuttered with astonishment. I greeted him. I didn't expect him to answer. It's not morning, but the afternoon, he replied to my surprise. Although he found fault with something I said, as expected, it wouldn't do me any good to be hurt by his response. Yes, it is indeed. That was my mistake, I agreed calmly, hoping that was the end of our conversation. I walked towards the bookshelf. That's estate management theory, he said. Father was burning a hole at the book I was holding. His stony expression gave away his thoughts. It seemed like he's asking me why I'm reading something like this. I hurriedly placed the book back on the shelf and said, Yes, I was simply curious about what kind of duties Father performs as a lord. His expression hardened at my excuses. Why are you curious about that? Oh, what if he thinks I'm being greedy? I don't have any other intentions. I was merely curious. I didn't want him to misunderstand, so I replied with a dry tone to avoid sounding materialistic or ambitious. Though I made an effort to avoid offending him, he frowned slightly. I gulped nervously and added, I'm sorry for bothering you. I'll be going now. I sneakily ended the conversation and tried to leave the library. Jubelian, a cold voice called my name, so I turned back around. Father was staring at me with a stony face. Sit down. Does he have something he wants to say? My head began pounding as I tried figuring out Father's intentions. Alan did advise me to relax my mind and body, and I was afraid of falling ill again, but I couldn't ignore Father's burdensome gaze. I suppose this wasn't something I could avoid, so I immediately settled myself on the couch across from him. The soft, fluffy cushion relaxed my body, but I was tense and on the edge. Jubelian, I forced myself to listen attentively. Do you know the three elements that make up an estate? The land is the foundation of an estate, the Lord establishes and protects order, and the people are responsible for the production of resources. I didn't expect him to quiz me, but I responded promptly without missing a beat. You learned well. Yes, since I've read the entire book. Thinking that this was all he had to say, I planned to return to my room, but was interrupted by his sudden outburst. Then do you know this as well? However, Father's pop quiz wasn't over. He continued asking questions one after another to check that I had read the book thoroughly. When will this end? I glanced at the time, and saw it was already 3 o'clock, 2 hours after I had left my room. I usually had tea time around this hour, and those chocolate cookies I told Sella to bring. I sighed at my current predicament, wondering when it will end. Then, as if my prayers were answered, there was a knock on the door. The guest has arrived, Master. Father stood up at the words of Derek, our butler. Is it finally over? I observed him with tentative relief. Please, please leave me alone. However, Father continued defying my expectations and walked in front of the bookshelf while I suppressed the urge to sigh. Master, Derek called again. Father didn't answer. Why is he looking for a book? Before curiosity continued to swallow me up, he walked towards me with 2 books that he picked out. Read these, he said. He handed them to me, and left the library. I looked at the back of his tall profile with trembling eyes, then checked the titles of the books he gave me. I could barely believe my eyes. Why did he want an ordinary lady to read about military strategy and tactics? It would have been helpful if Father gave me books on agriculture or commerce, but these books contained information that I would never use in my lifetime. But since he told me to read it, I should at least try right. I had already planned to read books that would aid my goal of becoming independent. It was rather troublesome that he added more to my growing list. I sighed as I thought about all the things I had to do when something caught my eye. A pendant. It was inlaid with a large blue gemstone that looked familiar. Where have I seen this before? I recalled that it was similar to the necklace Father always wore around his neck. He must have forgotten about it, and left it here. After deciding that I'd give it back to him later, I tucked the necklace into my pocket. When I came back to my room, Marilyn had just returned from her errand. Did it go well? She nodded politely. Yes, Lady Florian. As requested, the letters were delivered to the noble families. Thank you for going through the trouble. When I commended Marilyn for her work, an out-of-the-ordinary expression crossed her face again. Come to think of it, I used to hate having to do extra work than what was needed of me. She's probably frustrated having to toil more than usual. Poor Marilyn. I'll give her a bonus later. For now, some sweets will do. I handed Marilyn a plate of chocolate cookies. Take this. I'm sorry. I haven't touched it yet, I said, in case she thought I was giving her leftovers. They're new. Marilyn continued to look at me with a strange expression, then took the cookies and bowed. Thank you. Of course. You can leave now. I sipped my tea when she left the room. The responses to my letters will come soon. Until now, I never bothered replying. The Knoll families who sent them certainly won't be expecting handwritten letters, but when they did, they were obligated to write back. All I had to do now was wait patiently. It was cumbersome, but a necessary process for the sake of my future. I could only live peacefully after I subdued the hostility towards me. As always, the royal family was a topic of concern among the nobles. The borders are stable, so why doesn't His Majesty the Emperor bring His Highness the Prince back to the palace? Her Highness the Princess is also coming of age soon. Will they ever grace us with their presence? The royal prince and princess had never shown their faces in the social scene, so all the nobles were curious about them. Didn't you say your cousin was serving at the northern border, Lord Logie? I heard from him that His Highness the Prince is always wearing a helmet, so he's never seen his face. Is there a reason why he's always wearing a helmet? I don't know. Maybe he has a scar on his face or... Everyone tense. So the person who previously led the conversation prevented the noble from concocting this bold claim. That may be the case, but we don't know unless we see him in person, right? Someone quickly brought up a new topic to gossip about and said, by the way, did you receive the letters from Lady Florian? The next topic of interest after the royal family was the ducal family. People gladly joined in to speak their thoughts with pleasure. Yes, it seems like she's finally matured, a noble answered pridefully. He was one of the few families who received a reply. However, a grating voice wasn't afraid to voice criticism. There's no way a person like her could change so easily. He's right. You can't just forget about all the things she's done in the past. The letters must have been written by someone else. The many nobles who didn't receive a reply from Jubelian, and those who resented her didn't hold back their condemnation. It's odd that someone who used to do whatever she wanted would suddenly do something like this. Those who neither received a reply nor resented her expressed their misgivings. Lady Florian's change of behavior was inevitably a concern in the social world due to her powerful position and beauty. Although they gossiped about her, they were subtly envious of the people she had replied to. This is sickening, a man attending the banquet thought. He was disappointed by all the things he heard. What do you think about this incident, sir? Someone asked him. In response to the aristocratic man's question, the man glared at him with cold eyes. His lips twisted into a frown. I find you boorish to ask something like that. After speaking his mind, he turned around. Sir Michael. The aristocratic man desperately called after him, but he was already gone. After leaving the banquet hall, Michael clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. What do I think about this? A certain woman's pale face came to mind. In an instant, a cold smile graced his lips. It's obvious what she's thinking. This is just another scheme to get my attention.